That's the thing.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, here we are. I'm Julia Parrish, and I am talking to you tonight about Dead Birds Do Tell Tales, a COASST citizen science story. So, goodness. All right, here we go. Here is where I like to start with this question. And this is a question that I often put in front of the mainstream science community. Can citizen science be another part of the toolbox of science? So if there's lots of different ways that scientists go out and collect information, they go out themselves, they send their graduate students, they use satellites, they use camera traps, all sorts of things to collect information. Can they actually send other people? In fact, not send people, but connect with people in coastal communities who really know their backyards, right? Their coastal backyards very well. So there's two things to remember about citizen science. One, and this is super important, is that it's free choice public participation. So unlike our students at university that are taking classes and might have to do field trips with us and conduct research with us, as professors, we tell them what to do, and as students, they do it. But in citizen science, the key is to design programs that are attractive to people. And once the people join and become participants in the program, they continue to like it. So they stay around. Otherwise, they are also free to leave. So how you design and think about a citizen science program and what you're doing can be very, very different than how we design our research programs and certainly how we design our classes. Secondly, and very important, in a citizen science program, at least my version of citizen science has to be an authentic science experience with scientific outcomes. So it's not that we're asking people to do something where we already know what the answer is going to be. They're going out and they are collecting information that collectively is going to come together and add to the scientific knowledge base. We're going to learn new things. We are going to solve problems that heretofore have been unsolvable. And that is a really powerful thing to be involved in. And I'll return to that at the end of the talk. So let me just talk about some of the kinds of citizen science programs that are out there. This is a crowdsourcing citizen science program. It's called the Waddell Seal Count. And this is very, very cool. There's a lot of online citizen science now. And that's because we're collecting lots and lots and lots of digital information. And one of the kinds of digital information is photographs. So camera traps are automated cameras and sometimes video recorders that are collecting image information. And then those images are put in places where people can come and collect information about them. A really, really common platform is the Zooniverse. So you can go there. It's got about 100 to 150 projects active at any one time. And of those, an increasing number are environmental citizen science programs that are taking images of animals. Snapshot Serengeti is a really common one, but Waddell Seal Count is on there. And so lots and lots of people go on. They're recording the number of seals, the behavior of seals, the size of seals. And then because lots of different people are looking at the same images, there's a kind of way of voting. It's a sort of voting algorithm that discovers the truth of the photographs. A lot of citizen science programs nowadays are deploying sensors. So this is a fabulous citizen science program, SmartFin. It was started by Scripps, which is a research institution, marine research institution in San Diego, in conjunction with the Surfrider Foundation. So lots of surfers up and down the coast. It's an actual fin that gets snapped onto the bottom of a surfboard and it collects temperature and other information. And so the long graph or the trace that you can see here, the blue is the actual temperature off the Scripps Pier and the black are dots collected by SmartFins. So with these kinds of sensors that people can put on their surfboards, their boats, wear as a watch, we can get lots and lots of information. Also, citizen science programs collect samples themselves, certainly parcels of water, mussels, oysters, clams, other kinds of bivalves. In fact, coast-wide, so West Coast, East Coast, and Gulf Coast, and actually also in the Great Lakes, there are programs run by NOAA to collect bivalve samples, and those are sent in and analyzed for all sorts of toxins. And that is the way that we understand how to monitor the local health and shellfish health, and then set beach closure. So super, super important involvement of the public. This is one of my favorite citizen science programs, marine citizen science programs. It's called the REEF program, the Reef Environmental Education Foundation, or REEF, REEF for short. This is for research, excuse me, not research, for recreational divers. And it started as diving in coral reefs, but it's expanded both to the north and the south, and is worldwide right now. So it's both tropical and temperate diving, and basically people are collecting checklists. So imagine eBird underwater and you would have reef. This is one of my favorite local programs. This is Crab Team. Crab Team is a citizen science program that is developed to monitor for one particular species, the invasive green crab, the European green crab, shown here in the middle of the slide. And so people go out with the scientists from Crab Team, and they're actually trapping crabs the way you would go out and get Dungeness crabs or red rock crabs. So there's specialized traps that are used, and they're looking for green crabs. And so we have a really comprehensive monitoring program. Crab Team is part of the Washington Sea Grant program. And so then the COASST program. This is my own program, and here we are monitoring not only for species identity of one species, but many, many different species, and collecting information about where they are and when they're there. So before I get into the COASST program in detail, I just want to pose a question to you to think about. And that's, what's the goal, right? So me, I'm a scientist. So the goal is science, right? I want new information. I want to figure out what the emerging patterns are in a changing world, in a warming landscape, but I also want to be able to solve problems. But there are at least 3 other really, really important goals of citizen science. One, in the lower left, is just enjoyment, right? A participant should be able to go out and enjoy themselves, do what they want to do. They're not in school, they don't have to do it. So you join and you stay because you're motivated by the fun, the awe, the inspiration. It's something that you like to do. It's also something that you can be educated about. Lots of people say, I want to know more. I want to know more about what's going on. I've been walking this beach, or I've been going to this forest, or I've been looking at the feeder in my backyard. I want more information. So I'm going to join this program to learn more, because learning is lifelong, life-wide, and life deep. So if you're alive, even if you're asleep, you're learning. And then in the upper right, and really important, is community. So a lot of citizen science programs can empower communities, can give communities more information at a scale that allows them as a group of people to make decisions and to push back against some interests and organizations that they think might be crowding them. So 4 goals of citizen science. So I want to spend the rest of the talk talking about the COASST program. As Vic mentioned, that's the Coastal Observation and Seabird Survey Team, or COASST with 2 S's. And in COASST, the main thing we do is a standardized means the same way every time, a standardized search, repeated monthly, so month after month after month, and effort controlled, so we know how many people, and we know how long the beach is, and what are people doing? They're going out and they're collecting verifiable information. So if they're making a deduction about the species, it is verifiable. And extra points, you birders out there, if you know what species this is, and spoiler alert, it's not a West Coast species. So standardized search, repeated monthly, effort controlled, verifiable data. Put it in the chat, by the way, for beach cast birds. So literally dead birds, birds that have died at sea and are washing in on the tide. Because those bodies, even in death, may tell us something about the life and the health of the ecosystem. So if you participate in COASST, in the Beach Bird program in COASST, what's it mean to participate? So it's going to be about 1 to 5 hours a month, depending on the beach, both how wide your beach is and how long the beach segment is. The location of the beach and thus the length of the beach is set by the individuals who are surveying it. The width of the beach is the width of the beach. So what are you doing? You're surveying for beach cast carcasses of marine birds on your beach. So you're using a standardized routine to search every part of the beach from your stop point to your turnaround point. And when you find a carcass, like the folks in this photograph, you're going to measure take some standard measurements. You're going to collect condition information on the carcass. You're going to identify it using the data or the evidence that you have collected and our beach bird field guide, and you're going to photograph them. And we just have some photographs here collecting information like the foot type, taking those measurements, and 2 photographs. So what about identifying beach birds? You know, for birders, for folks that have a lot of information and acumen, you've honed your birding skills over time, that is really wonderful. But for most folks in the world, and definitely lots of people who live in coastal environments, they don't really know. So one of the things that we really had to do was back up, take out the jargon, right? And create a field guide, and not just a field guide, but a dichotomous key, this or that, right? So all of these bifurcations. And it's not really called Dead Birds for Dummies. It's called Beach Birds. And we actually have 3 different keys, one to the West Coast lower 48, one to Alaska, that's the one that you're seeing here, and we actually have a one to the Northeast Atlantic. And the Coast Beach Birds really takes identification and makes it quite simple. So the very first thing that you do is you identify the foot type, and we have a foot key, and it turns out, and this is cool, I mean, this is really cool. The foot of a bird, the number and arrangement of toes, whether they're webbed, whether they're free, whether they're lobed, tells you a lot about the taxonomy of the bird, because that's resolvable to family or subfamily. So it's very, very taxonomically conserved. And so if you knew nothing about a bird other than A, it's a bird, and B, it's dead, in about 5 hours, we can make you super, super accurate at dead bird identification, just starting with the feet. So the feet takes you to a foot type family, and then a foot type family, you answer a few more questions and you get to a species page. So there's no guessing in COASST. There's just use of scientific tools like dichotomous keys. We also have an online program. COASST has done in-community trainings for, as Vic said, about 20 years, but we've been forced online by the pandemic. So our online program is called COASST Lite. And it's interactive online trainings. We've been doing level 1 training for about 8 months now. It's basically how to survey the beach and how to collect basic carcass information. It's taken us more time to work up to carcass measurements and foot type and carcass identification online. And that's literally because we felt kind of squeamish, you know, about sending dead birds or bird parts through the mail to all the people who might participate. So we're still figuring that out. Actually, what we've been doing very, very recently is involving people in level 1. So they're going out, they know how to survey, they're finding dead birds, they're taking fabulous photographs. Our data verifier says, oh, you level 1 Coast Lite people are fantastic. And then we actually come to community and we do interactive trainings for measurements, foot type, and carcass identification. We also run a marine debris program. I'm not going to go into it at all tonight, but just to let you know that in Greater Puget Sound in the Salish Sea, COASST runs a marine debris program. It's the same kind of thing, surveying the beach, collecting debris, characterizing it, and photographing it. So back to beach birds. Here's some basic stats of beach birds. We're just a little over 20 years old. Right now we monitor about 450 sites from Mendocino in California. So the map on the right side divides COASST into regions by color. And you can see our region down in Mendocino. We run all the way up the coast line through Oregon and Washington, whip into the Strait and Puget Sound, leap across British Columbia. Not that we don't like Canada, we love Canada. We have a sister program there, British Columbia Beach Bird Survey. They use our techniques. Then we pick up in Southeast, the Gulf of Alaska, run out to the end of the Aleutian Islands, which are the Commander Islands, which are actually owned by Russia. leap over the Alaska Peninsula into the Bering Sea and the Bering Strait region. That's when Alaska and Russia come closest together, and then up into the Chukchi and the Arctic, where Uktiavik is our northernmost site. So we work in about 90 different coastal communities. We found about 88,000, give or take, bird carcasses of about 200 different species. Right now, depending on how you count things, we have maybe between 600 and 800 active participants, but we've trained over 5,000 people since our inception. And the COASST statistics of people in general, more women than men, a bunch of folks that have participated in STEM programs in their careers, science, technology, engineering, and math, lots of educators. And we have a fair bolus of retirees, and that's because retirees have time and they know what they want to do, so they sign up and they stay with us. Very, very many snaps for retirees. Okay, so how good are coasters? Walking into a training, this is what they tell us about themselves. So self-identifying how good they are at identifying birds to species. Only about 15% of folks walking into a training will say, well, you know, I'm an expert. I am really good. I'm a master birder, right? Or, well, no, I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty advanced. I really can tell birds. I'm not Charlie Wright, but I'm pretty darn good. Turns out most coasters are not that. In fact, about half of coasters walk into a training and say they're either a beginner or they even feel like they can't even say they're a beginner. They say, well, you know, I really have no experience at all. And I think to myself, sure you have, right? Everybody knows what a bird is, right? If you walk down the beach and you come across a bird, you'll know what a bird is, right? So suffice to say that about half of people walking into a training are very, very reticent, right? They're worried about their skills. And so the question is, how good can we make them in that single 5 to 6 hour in-person training that we do? So this graphic, let me walk you through this graphic. Each one of these dots is an intersection on the X, or the horizontal axis, of the number of birds that a coaster has found, right? So over on the right-hand side at 400 or 500 carcasses, those are folks that have been in coast for a while. And over on the left-hand side, more towards 0, those are folks that have not been in coast very long or survey beaches that are not very dead birdy at all. So what's on the Y, or the vertical axis? That's carcass specific accuracy. How likely are you, if you find a carcass, how likely are you to get it correct to species? So you can see that some dots are small and some dots are large. And that's because there are multiple people that fit into the dots. So there are more people over towards 0 and fewer people over towards 400 or 500 carcasses. Now you can see there's a red line with a wash. That's a statistical model. So we take all those dots and we make a mathematical model of it so we can tell things in general about the pattern. So there are two things that I want to point out to you. So theoretically, when you walk out of a training, you've got some skills, right? You've got some new skills, hopefully, that you got from COASST. And right at the intercept, or where that red line, that model, meets the vertical axis, is how good you should be when you start your very first survey. What is that? Turns out that's 70%. So, oh my goodness, right? Look, those 50% of people who think I'm a beginner, I don't even really know it's a bird, 5 hours later, they can get 7 out of 10 carcasses correct to species. That is amazing, because on the beach, about 2/3 of those carcasses are, shall we say, not all there. They are at very least disheveled, and often they have body parts missing, either because predators got them and that was the cause of death, or because scavengers got them. But look at the model, look at the red line. It doesn't just, it's not flat, right? It goes up and then it flattens out. So people get better with practice. Practice makes perfect. We all know this. So after about a year, on average, across all of COASST, that model gets better to about 87%, and then it flattens out. You get to about 80%, or 9 out of 10 carcasses correct, and you flatten out. And that's because 9 out of 10, that means the 1 out of 10 carcass that you're finding tends to be a rare thing. Sometimes it's not even in the key. So how do we know this? We know this because coasters collect the foot type, they collect 3 measurements, in fact, the foot, the wing, and the bill, and they take photographs. And those pieces of evidence allow us to independently verify the carcass to species. So we take the expert data verifier decision and we match it and see how accurate coasters are. So that is not only great for the program because it allows us to tune our training, but it's great for the participants because they know that they're right. And it's also great for mainstream science and for natural resource management because they come to trust COASST data directly as part of science. So what can we do with all of this cool, great, very accurate data? So one thing that we can see in COASST is these uber rarities, and the birders in COASST really love this. So this is one of my favorite rarities. This is COASST species number 183, the purple gallinule. And those of you who know about gallinules and birds, and this map in the lower right is from the Birds of North America, showing that gallinules are way, way not supposed to be here. I mean, like not supposed to be here. So that star along the Washington outer coast where that gallinule wing was found, those of you who have been to the outer coast may know of Hobuck Beach. It's on the Macaw Reservation. It is the dead birdiest beach that we have in COASST in terms of species diversity. And the folks that were out on Hobuck found that wing. They didn't know what it is. Suffice to say, it wasn't in the COASST Field Guide, but they took this beautiful photograph. So I have to just really talk about this photograph. Most people really like to take photographs of live birds like the gallinule photograph here. But, you know, for the average person to just really brush the sand off the wing, set that wing up, put it there with their slate, right? And it's got a ruler on top of the slate. That's all the photographic information that we need to get this to species. And in fact, there was another photograph of the underside of the wing. So that allowed us to type this. This is the first record of a purple gallinule in Washington. So we can actually also look at which species are common and which species are rare. So the black bars marching across the page from common murres, lots of common murres, all the way out onto western grebes, species number 10 in COASST. So the black bars are all of the different species in COASST. And you can see that common murres, northern fulmars, Cassin's auklets, large immature gulls, that's a multi-species complex because really only Dennis Paulson and God can tell the difference between immature gulls. So we put them together in COASST. So that's what we see across the entire COASST program. But in the Salish Sea, we see a very different distribution. You can see the list from number 1 rhinoceros auklets on down. So it's very similar, but not actually quite the same. As you might expect in the Salish Sea, we're seeing relatively fewer things like northern fulmars or Cassin's auklets or sooty shearwaters. We do see quite a few murres, lots of gulls, lots of rhinos because they breed in the Salish Sea, and of course, tons and tons of glaucous winged gulls. So we can compare species lists and see what's going on, but that's actually not the most important thing that COASST does. The most important thing that COASST does is create a baseline, right? A baseline of what you expect, which species you expect when we think we're going to see more dead birds, when we think we want to see less dead birds. Now, the graph that I'm showing you is a graph from the northern outer coast of Oregon, so the top half of Oregon. And that black line that kind of looks like a 3 mountain range with the yellow wash on it, that's the long-term baseline. We get new data into COASST every single day into our database. And so our baseline is going to change very, very subtly every day. But all of the data in COASST here from the northern coast of Oregon goes into producing that baseline. What is average? What is normal? And you can see on the Y or the vertical axis that we're looking at the encounter rate in carcasses per kilometer. So if you walked a kilometer of beach in June on the northern outer coast, how many carcasses would you expect to find? And the answer is maybe one every other time, right? So half a carcass on average. On average, you'd have to walk 2 kilometers to find a carcass. But look at the November, right? November was a high in that one particular year, 2010 to 2011, there were over 8 carcasses per kilometer. The long-term average suggests that we should see a peak in the August-September window, something in the 5 to 6 carcass range. So we calculate the baseline from the actual data, and then we actually look at what happened versus the baseline. So I'm showing you 1 year, the gray bars are what actually happened, the black line plus the yellow wash are our long-term average or baseline, but I can stretch that out over several years. So I'm going to show you lots more gray bars. And now that baseline is going to repeat year over year. So it's going to look like an EKG or a heartbeat graph. So there it is. And I'm just circling 2010 to 2011 to show you the big graphic. And you can see that, you know, the baseline looks the same year after year, which it's supposed to, right? Because that's the baseline. And you can see that the gray bars are, you know, sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're lower, but more or less they match the baseline. This makes sense mathematically because we use the gray bars to make the baseline. So in these years, 2006 to 2014, at least on the northern coast of Oregon, everything was pretty good. Everything was copacetic. This is a normal baseline. Nobody's got their knickers in a knot. Nobody's upset. What about what happened after that? So I'm just extending that same baseline, that same graph that you just saw through to 2016. And now you can see, oh my goodness. Going out of 2014 into 2015, we saw an amazing catastrophic signal, just a huge wow out. So instead of 3 to 4 carcasses per kilometer, what we would expect to see, we saw 25, even 30 carcasses per kilometer. The peak of that particular signal was over 200 carcasses per kilometer. The photograph here of many dead birds lined up was from one of those beaches, and all of those carcasses were the same species, Cassin's auklet, which you can see live here. It's about the size of my fist. It's a relatively small bird. It's an alcid, so related to tufted puffins and common murres and marbled murrelets. And it has that lovely little white eyebrow, so it always looks like it's asking you a question. So a little about Cassin's auklets. There are about 5.5 million of them in the world. They are centered along the west coast of North America. They'll live about 6 to 10 years. They eat small things like krill, so small shrimp like things, and other zooplankton, and occasionally larval fish. They are burrow nesters, pretty amazing. And the center of their population is in British Columbia, and it's actually where this gold star is on the map, and that is the Scott Island group. It's 5 islands off the northwest tip of Vancouver Island, which is, oh my gosh, windy, wild, amazing place. And the 5th island out, Triangle Island, has the densest concentration of Cassin's auklets in the world. So they definitely are down in our area. Washington to Baja has about 270,000, but BC alone has over half, a little more than half of the world's population. So this is what we call a bullseye map. And it's how one way that we show a mass mortality event. So a big wow out, a big catastrophe. And each row across tells you what part of the world you're in. So we're slicing up the West Coast into little layers like a cake. Sometimes we refer to that as strata. And each column marching across that graphic is another month. So starting in September of 2014 and marching through to March of 2015. So what's the actual bullseye? Well, that black dot that's in the middle is the long-term baseline signal. And the yellow circle is what happened in that particular year, 14-15. So when there's a big yellow bullseye, you can say, oh my gosh, that's when there were lots of carcasses. And when the yellow is really small, approaching the size of the black, you can say, oh, pretty normal. So that allows us to read what's going on. And we can see that in November into December, there were many times normal Cassin's auklets washing in, actually just above San Francisco, so in Northern California. But things really took off in December and January along the outer coast of Oregon and up into Washington state. So way more than normal. So peaks at about 35 birds per kilometer per day. But that was about 100 times the baseline, 100 times normal. Pretty amazing. So in this event alone, we recovered about 7,500 Cassin's auklet carcasses. And we know that this mortality event was actually produced by a change in the amount of food and where food could be found, but something else. Because of the warming event, the blob, or the Northeast Pacific marine heat wave, if you're into science jargon, we also know that many, perhaps all of the Cassin's auklets that were dispersing off those colonies in British Columbia and smearing down into Washington were very, very close to the shoreline. And that's because that's the only place where the water was cold and food rich. Offshore, where the blob was, it was very warm and it was a food desert. So what happened to all those birds very close to the shore? We worked with Parker McCready, the oceanographer shown here, because he has a super cool model called Live Ocean. And Live Ocean allows us to look at any day of the year in the past, going back now about to 2004. So we can choose a day and we can choose a place in the ocean on the surface of the ocean, or we can actually go down to depth. And we can place a particle there of known size. And if it's on the surface of the ocean, known windage. That's how far above the water it's sticking, because something that's very far above the water is going to be pushed by the wind as well as carried along by the current. So we actually used Parker's model to place little Cassin's auklets particles in all of the places you see dots here on this map, and float them around and see what happened. So I'm going to show you two of those simulations, one that started the 19th of December, 2014, that's on the left side, and one that started the 22nd of December, just 3 days later of 2014 on the right. So each triangle is a Cassin's auklet. I'm going to let it float for 7 days. And if it hits the shoreline, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to stick it to the shoreline. So let's just watch and see what happens. Let's really try and watch. There we go. So you can see that both of these simulations are running, and the little tails from the triangles just gives you some sense of where they've come from. And you can see that there are a lot of little curlicues that are going on. That's a function of the tide, the daily tide that's sloshing things in and out. But oh my gosh, look at the difference. So on the left side of your screen on the 19th of December, you can see that a lot of those Cassin's auklet actually end up on the shore. Whereas on the right side of your screen on the 22nd, a lot of them stayed at sea. So when you die as a live bird and where you die is going to really make a difference about whether you get to shore or not. And so we could use Parker's model to run all sorts of simulations and sort of build up a probability map. How far away from shore could you be and still get to shore, to the beach as a dead bird? And here's a map of that. So if we only let you float for 3 days before we sink those carcasses, pretty close to shore. 5 days and 7 days, it's a little farther out. But amazingly, there's not a little square of ocean that's outside of about 100 kilometers offshore. So if Cassin's died more than 100 kilometers offshore, they're never going to get to the beach. So if we see a huge number of Cassin's on shore, that tells us where they died. It's so cool. So we can run the model in reverse and say they had to have been in one of these colored squares. And that tells us something about the last decision that the live birds made, where to be, where they were trying to find food. And that gives us insight into the ecology of the species and also tells us about the causality of the mortality event. So here's what happened. The ocean was really stuck on warm. That was the blob. That persistently warm water that lasted for months and months actually changed not only the species of prey that could survive there, but the size of the prey. It made it very, very hard for Cassin's auklets to eat out in the ocean. So they stuck close to shore, where you can see in the lower graphic that one place where the ocean is blue. So all of the cassins crowded into that blue section. And then during the fall turnover, when coastal upwelling goes away, that blue went away and those cassins starved to death. But because they were so close to shore, that's why we got them. So very, very cool story about ecology, and also very, very cool story about physics. So let me tell you another story a little closer to home. This is about rhinoceros auklets. So they are related to Cassin's auklets. They're in the same family, the alcid family, along with the murres and the puffins and the merlets. About 2 to 3 million of these guys. They're a little larger than cassins, very football shaped, football with wings. You can see that here. They live a little longer, 20 to 25 years. And so they're, because they're bigger, they're eating a little bit up on the food chain, small fish. They're also burrow nesters, just like the cassins. And in the Salish Sea, the largest breeding colony is Protection Island, which is shown here. And there are about 70,000 rhinoceros auklets that nest on Protection Island. So just amazing, amazing, amazing place. So the rhinoceros auklet mass mortality event happened a year later than the cassins. It happened in 2016. And in fact, you can see from these maps on the left-hand side, you're seeing the close-up of the Salish Sea, and on the right-hand side, you're seeing the outer coast. Blue dots are places where we had surveys and found no auklets. Red dots are where we found auklets, and the size of the dot tells you something about how many we found. And you can see that in June, we're starting to see a little bit of a signal around Protection Island and on the south side of the strait. People are starting to get concerned. By July, oh my gosh, like everything was breaking loose, and we were seeing lots and lots and lots of dead rhinoceros auklets, and also seeing a lot of sick ones. And we were very concerned about what might happen to those sick auklets, and if they went dispersed offshore, would they intersect with the British Columbia population, which is a lot bigger, and transmit the disease? So June and July, we were really watching to see what was going on in the outer coast, and you can see that we're seeing lots more than normal dead rhinoceros auklets up in the Macaw Reservation area, Hobock, Suyez beaches, but also down in the Grace Harbor area. So August and September in Puget Sound really got hot and heavy in August, and by September things are calming down again. That's not because the mortality event is over. That's because rhinos have finished breeding and they're leaving the sound. But let's see what's going on the outer coast. Wow, amazing. Look at that. Look at those huge big red circles in August and even again in September. So this was really making us think about, wow, what's going on? So when these events are happening, we're trying to figure out in real time what's killing the birds. And one of the things that we're most concerned about is toxins or diseases, and mainly because we want to know whether they're transmissible to humans. So because this occurred in the Salish Sea, so both the Washington side and the BC side, we had researchers and vets from both sides interacting. And here are results of necropsies, so morgue dissections of these birds from both Canada and the US. And both labs came to the same conclusion, that is that we had a infectious agent in the colony, and it swept through the colony. It was identified as a bacteria called Biscard taxon 40. Biscard is the name of a guy who identifies bacteria. Taxon 40 is the 40th taxon that he's identified. And so these birds died of a massive infection or septicemia. And so the question was the disease exacerbated by warm conditions or food stress? And did the Protection Island birds infect the others post-breeding? We now know that the protection birds did not infect the others post-breeding, but there was a massive change in the Protection Island colony. And we do believe that this event was exacerbated by warm water, by that blob, and the change in food conditions or food stress. So you can read about these two events, the Cassin's auklets, and other events, two others that I haven't told you about, common murres and tufted puffins, in our scientific publications. If you really want to fall asleep at night, just email me and say, hey, Julia, send me your publications, because they're kind of snorers for real people. But we have translated them on the COASST website. www.coast.org. So if you want to read in real words what went on, and also find out something about the scientists who worked on those projects, go to the COASST website and read the science updates. So I've told you about 2 mass mortality events, and now I want to actually show you the largest picture. So very rarely in the career of a scientist can you take everything, like all the data from thousands of people and from hundreds and hundreds of sites, and put it all together in one graph. But we've managed to do that. So that's really powerful, and it's kind of humbling too, I gotta say, when I can do all of my science over 20 years in one graphic. But I'm gonna put it all together, and I'm gonna try and show you, and hopefully you can follow along with me. Okay, so there's kind of a railroad track that goes through the middle of this slide, and it starts at 2006 and it runs through to 2021. So almost present. And there's a lot of white space, and I'm going to fill that white space. But below the railroad track, you can also see a time trace, right? So if you go to the bottom of the graphic, you can see also 2006 all the way out to 2022. So what are all those colored stripes? Well, first of all, each stripe describes a place in the world. So the bottom stripe is central to Northern California. And the top stripe is the Chukchi Sea. So that's nestled right up next to the Arctic. And so each stripe is a place going from the southern extent of the COASST data set in central to Northern California, all the way on up to the Chukchi, which is nestled up to the Arctic. So what are you actually looking at in these stripes? So we actually look at the sea surface temperature, or SST, anomaly. So what's an anomaly? It's whether things are higher than normal or lower than normal. So it allows us to reset normal as 0. So lower than normal would be negative. So that's white or empty space on this graph, and higher than normal would be positive. So just higher than normal is the gold color, a whole degree centigrade. So remember, that's about 1.4, 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit above normal is a red stripe, and a dark red stripe is 2 degrees centigrade above normal. Now you might say 2 degrees centigrade is not a lot, but think of the ocean as your body. If you were 2 degrees above normal, centigrade, you would be very concerned. You would have a fever, and the ocean acts the same way. So a 2-degree increase in temperature of the surface of the ocean that's persistent over a long period of time can really, really change the ocean ecosystem. And so I want you to look at this graphic and notice that things are pretty much normal from 2006 to 2014, except up there in the Northern Bering and the Chukchi Sea, where we can see a lot of evidence of warming. But then around about the end of 2000, or the beginning of 2014, end of 2013, we really see a change, and it's a change over thousands of kilometers, right? And very, very different marine ecosystems. And so what I'm going to do on that railroad trace is now I'm going to show you all the mass mortality events that we have seen in COASST over the years. And each one is going to be a bubble. And the size of the bubble is going to tell you something about how big that mortality event was. So bigger bubbles, larger event, smaller bubbles, smaller event. And the bubbles are going to be different colors, and each color is going to tell you something about the type of bird, down to the family of bird. So let's look at that period of time when the ocean was pretty much normal. So here you can see that from 2006 to 2014, mostly smallish, one big SCOTUR event. Infrequent, so a lot of time space in between the bubbles, pretty taxonomically diverse, right? There's alcids there, there's procellareids, the fulmars, there's waterfowl, the scoters, there's larids, the kittiwakes, right? So a little more alcidy, puffins, auklets, and rhinoceros auklets, but also wide geographic spread down in Oregon and California and Washington, Gulf of Alaska, all the way up on St. Lawrence Island, like lots of different places. Now look at what happened when the ocean started to really change and became much warmer. Wow, from 2014 to 2016, right? Just 2 years or 3 years, excuse me, of range, we're seeing much, much larger mass mortality events, and they're all alcids, right? They're different species, but they're all in the same family. And they're centered from the Northern California current system up to the Gulf of Alaska. Some very, very large events, the Cassin's auklets event, that's the pink one, and a massive common murre die-off, that's the red one. So what's happened up to current? We've actually seen a little bit of a shift over time. So the mass mortality events continue. Some of them are very large, others of them are pretty small, but the species distribution has changed. We've switched from the alcids to the procellareids, the fulmars, the shearwaters, related to albatross, to storm petrels, a few murres, but mostly procellareids. But also things have moved north into the Bering and Chukchi Sea. So when we look at the entire COASST program, what we can see is there's really an effect of a warming ocean. And the COASST data, all of the COASST data collected by thousands of people, is one of the very, very best demonstrations of how upper trophics, so those species at the top of the food chain, like seabirds, can respond to these warming events. And it's actually not good. When we look at just from 2014 on, we can see that well over 2 million birds have lost their lives because of this warming event. So to say that there is a massive effect of ocean warming as a function of climate, a changing climate, is not lost on seabird biologists or on seabirds. Okay, so I want to just finish out by telling you a little bit about coasters themselves. And why people join and why they stay. So I'm going to show you some graphics about people that have just joined COASST, new coasters, they've just walked in, and they're answering some questions for us about why they joined COASST. And I'm going to compare and contrast that to people who have been in the COASST program for a year or more. And they're answering the question, why do you do COASST? So basically, why do you continue? So we can actually compare and contrast the answers. And people talk a lot about different things that they are attracted to, and also actions that they want to take. Okay, so going towards the left are the new guys and going towards the right are the seasoned guys. I mean, you can see that new guys talk a lot about the environment, they talk about birds, they talk about wanting to learn, as this quote indicates here, whereas seasoned coasters talk about the beach. They talk about coast, not surprising, but they also talk about science. They talk about being outdoors, and they're starting to use the words of science. They talk about monitoring and observing. So it's not that they want to stop doing the other things. It's just that they've changed their language a bit and how they are thinking about why they want to continue. They also talk a lot about themselves. And again, going towards the left are new guys and going towards the right are seasoned coasters. So when people join COASST, they really feel a desire to tell us their credentials, right? I have this job and therefore I'm going to be good. I have a degree in biology, and so I'll be good at identifying birds. I've been a citizen science person. I'm a birder. I'm a retiree. But inside of a year, they start to not talk about all those credentials. They don't lose them. They just don't talk about them. They talk about being a survey team member. They talk about being a member of the entire collective of COASST, about being a data collector or a science team member. They actually talk a little bit more about family because they tend to bring family out with them. Something that I haven't really talked about much. So with engagement, coasters, they really intensify their connection to the beach, right? And they increase their use of science language. And that's because they're part of a science program. So that's a good thing. They drop their individual attributes or credentials in favor of an intensified science identity, but they stay social. So let me just talk about that sociality in a minute. So this is a kind of hard graphic to interpret. It's kind of like that model that I showed you to begin with. So I'm going to walk you through it. So on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, is the cumulative number of unique partners each coaster has had. So each one of these transparent dots is a intersection of people who have had that unique number of partners. And on the y-axis, the average number of partners that they go out on surveys with. So a larger dot is, actually, I'm sorry, a larger dot here is more surveys. Each dot is an individual coaster, and we've made them transparent so we can stack them on top of each other. So on the y-axis, people who go out with a lot of people who have teams, there aren't a lot of those. There are little dots up there. And people who go out in pairs, there are a lot of people in pairs, but there are a lot of loners as well. There are a lot of people who have a mean number of partners as 0, which means they never have a partner. They always go out by themselves, and so they don't have any cumulative partners either. But we can also see that there are a lot of people that go out in pairs, and sometimes they go out for so long that they change their partners over time, right? So their mean number of people they go out with is 1, but they have not just one person over time, but 2 or 3 or 5. So COASST can be a very social program. So look at those red dots. We call those red dots the nexus people or the networky people. They don't actually go out with so many people at a time, but oh my goodness, over the time that they're in COASST, they'll have 10 different partners or 20 or 30 or 50 or 65. I mean, an amazing number of people. So those red dot people are people who are literally scooping folks up from the community and saying, hey, come out on a COASST survey with me. This is really fun. You're going to love this. They bring people into the program. They make us realize that COASST is social. So one of the things that we did was we created a little network analysis, and I'm just showing you the largest network. So what do you make of this other than it's kind of cool and it's in different colors? So each circle is an actual person, an individual person, and the size of the circle is how many surveys they've gone out on. And the color of the circle is the year they joined, and I'm not showing you that information. So what are all the lines? The lines join people who have gone out on a survey together. So a real thick line means they've gone out on lots of surveys together. And a real thin, sort of spidery thin line means that they haven't gone out on a lot of surveys. So you can see some big circles with lots of thin lines and a little halo of tiny little circles around them. And that means that that's a person who's gone out with a lot of other people. So this is like the friends of friends of friends of friends of friends thing. And when you ask how many people are in this network, how many people are connected because he went out with her and she went out with him and he went out with them and they went out with others, 949 different people. It is amazing. It is really, really social. And the other thing about this lovely social connection where everybody's going out and doing the same thing is they know it. This is the power of the collective. So 97% of people in COASST who are asked this question, what's the value of what you do as a COASST volunteer? We'll talk about the data. Oh my gosh, it's about the data. It's because we're all going out, we're all doing it the right way. We're all doing the same thing. And that large data allows scientists to paint these pictures that we could never do down at the individual beach. It's the picture that I painted to you tonight of the mass mortality events. And while I can talk about it, and hopefully persuasively, our coasters can talk about it too. So this last graphic that I'm going to show you on the top tells you something about people that coasters interact with regularly, their friends and their family, other coworkers, other people that they see on the beach, their neighbors, people who are in other groups that they belong to. And every single coaster talks to those kinds of people all of the time. So there's a lot of green there. Dark green is I talk to those people often. Medium green is sometimes, and light green is rarely. But this is not just talking to them, it's talking to them about COASST, what they found on their surveys, what the program is like, convincing them to join. This is all sorts of communication about COASST. So there's a lot of dissemination of information into coastal communities that I don't do, they do, right? Now, look at the bottom graphic. The bottom graphic is talking to communicators and decision makers, people like reporters or politicians or resource managers. And here, most coasters never talk to any of those people. So that's the white never, right? And there's a thin slice of folks that say, yeah, I talked to a reporter once, I talked to a politician once, and a slightly larger slice of people that said more than once. So this is kind of a glass half full, glass half empty graphic. You might say, hey, Julia, you know, I'm looking at that graphic, and what you're showing me is that 60 to 80% of your folks just never talk to communicators or decision makers. That's a pretty poor showing. But I would say to you, flip it around. That means that 20 to 40% of coasters have talked to a decision maker at least once, if not more than once. And remember that we have trained 5,000 people over time. So that means hundreds of people across California and Oregon and Washington and Alaska talk to reporters and politicians and resource managers about COASST. And that voice can really make a difference. Why? Because COASST makes a difference in science and resource management. We deal with climate impacts, and I've talked to you about that tonight. We also research harmful algal blooms, changes in predator distribution and abundance, fishery bycatch and fishery competition, disease outbreaks like the one that I talked to you about with the rhinoceros auklets. We have a whole marine debris program, which I haven't talked about at all. We look at habitat change and carrying capacity, and also we study the people, and we know it's the people who make a difference. So I can say to you, science is definitely a team sport. And I leave you with this question: who's on your team? So if you want to know more about COASST, you can go to the COASST website, www.coast.org. This is the main page here. And if you want to know more about our upcoming events, including talks and trainings, you can go to the upcoming events page, or you can just go to join our team and find out about trainings and events. So, goodness, thank you for sticking with me all this time. I hope I didn't bore you too much with science or gross you out too much with dead birds. I hope everybody has long since had dinner and nobody had chicken. And I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Well, thanks so much for that great presentation. And once again, if you have some questions, you could go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll read them. Another option is you could raise your hand and we can call on you. There's been a couple of questions that are in there. The first one is more of a comment, just when you were talking about citizen science in the beginning, the different types, it looked like it's very similar to fish surveys that divers conduct. And
yeah,
Becca thought that was very cool.
Yeah, it's totally like that. I would say the only difference is, to pardon the pun, we have bird in hand, right? So unlike eBird or some of the other live bird programs, and unlike Reef, the fish program, the identity can't really be verified, right? So for instance, in eBird, if somebody sees a rare bird, how do we actually know that they saw it? Others might go out and they might see it too. So we might have multiple records. Or the local verifier might actually know that birder and might say, yeah, you know, that was Vic. And I trust Vic. He's really good. And so I'm going to say, yep, it probably is that thing. I mean, that's how eBird does verification. And because we have bird in hand, we know it. So yeah, it's very, very similar in terms of number of species, and super, super powerful, at those really big scales. And Reef is definitely like that. Yeah.
Great. So Casey had two questions. One is, how can you order a copy of the Beached Bird book? And then how likely is it that the same bird carcass is counted twice or more?
Oh my gosh. Those are great questions. The first one is really self-serving. So Casey, thank you for that. You can actually order beach birds on the website. So if you go to the website and go to the toolbox, you can order that. If you join COASST, we ask new coasters for a deposit for the kit, which includes the Beach Birds book, which we will return to people after a year of participation. So I think our current, gosh, I wish I could tell you exactly what the price is, but I'm probably going to mess up here. But I think it's about 35. It might be 37 bucks. Well worth it. Not only because you can identify dead birds with it, but because all the pages are laminated, so you can actually match the head outline, the bill outline to the page, and then you can just wipe that schmutz right off and use the book again. So it's the most practical field guide you will ever find. So how likely is it that the same bird carcass is counted twice or more? It is 0 unlikely. And the reason is because we actually tag every single carcass. And that's to prevent recounts, but it's also to understand the patterns of carcass longevity, right? So how long do carcasses last? And this is a little macabre, what body parts last the longest, right? So we want to know what body parts last the longest, because when we design our keys, we want to design them for for those parts. Because if we're telling you, oh, the breast looks like this, and right here's the difference from the breeding plumage to the winter plumage, but a scavenger came and ate the breast out, well, that's kind of inconvenient. So we do tagging to figure out what body parts last the longest. And as you might imagine, I'm sure you can guess and put this in the chat, but wings last a long time, right? Because there's no meat. And feet.
What happens
actually
if the
last a
tag
long time.
what happens if the tag itself is hauled away by a predator?
Yeah, that we think that actually happens on occasion. So we will occasionally do double tag studies so that we can look at tag loss rate. So we've just actually switched to some new tags. We did what turned into a 3-year mega project on sustainable tags. We had used plastic cable ties, but that leaves plastic in the environment. Not a lot, a tiny little amount, but plastic is plastic. And so now we use hardwood plugs, and they're sustainably forested, right? So we had to go all the way back to where's the wood come from? Is it sustainably harvested? Does it have toxic glue in it? How can we make numbers on those tags? Will they last for a year? How are we affixing them to the carcass? So we did all of that. Amazing. Coasters were amazingly involved in that, but we're still doing the double tag studies with those new tags because it turns out that those are a little more attractive to people on the beach. So they want to, right? And I just think to myself, the stuff that people collect, right? You walk up to a dead bird, it's got a tag on it. You think, ooh, this is cool. And you cut the tag off.
Yeah.
Who knew? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for those questions.
A lot of people said great, thanks for the presentation, very informative. Kanako had 2 questions. One is for those that handle the dead birds, especially those that maybe died from disease, do you have to take precautions? And then the other question was after the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami, did you find more marine debris? And
yeah, those are great questions. Those are great. So let me handle the safety one first. We are really concerned about that. And we have been concerned since we started. So when not too many years after COASST started, West Nile virus hit the West Coast. And you'll remember that West Nile virus killed crows. It actually infected many, many different kinds of birds, but most seriously affected the corvid population. And we have always advised coasters to wear gloves. So we have surgical gloves that we use in trainings, but most coasters use kitchen gloves because they're washable and reusable, and we're not throwing away that latex or that plastic. And then coasters in Alaska use kitchen gloves or fish gloves that are insulated because it's cold out there. So it makes it a little hard to tie stuff. But those are good things. So yeah, we strongly advise and we practice always using gloves. A really good reason to go out in a team in COASST is that one person is the bird handler and one person handles the data sheet and the field guide. So there are different tasks, and that also makes science a team sport, makes science fun. And then you can switch from month to month, and so everybody gets to do all tasks over time. So yeah, that's really great. And we actually work with the CDC in Atlanta on diseases because we've seen West Nile virus, and then we saw a SARS virus, and then we saw avian influenza, H5N1. And so really want to make sure that we're not transmitting to humans. None of those diseases, there are no records of transmission from dead birds to humans of any of those diseases. But you know what? Better safe than sorry is what we say all the time. So wear gloves. So after the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami, did we find more debris washing up on the beaches? The answer is yes. We definitely found all sorts of Japanese debris. But here is a very interesting thing. After the tsunami, everybody and their brother went out to beaches because they wanted to see Japanese debris, right? And they're collecting all sorts of stuff that has Asian characters on it. And they're assuming that all of that writing is Japanese. And in fact, most of it was not. Most of it was Chinese, either Mandarin or Cantonese. And that's because China is manufacturing much of the fishing gear that is used in the North Pacific, and that amount of gear is lost all the time. So we actually this was pretty fun. We worked with the linguistics departments at the University of Washington, and we had a whole bunch of undergraduate interns that were Chinese speakers, Japanese speakers, speaking Filipino, Tagalog, and also some of the dialects in Indonesia. So all of the languages within the west side of the Pacific that have different alphabets, not Arabic alphabets. And they actually made a key to those alphabets. So we could actually tell from the writing on things where they came from, including Cyrillic, right, which is the Russian alphabet. So yes, lots more things from Fukushima, but also lots and lots of things continuing from Chinese manufacture, not necessarily left the beach in China. And just, I know that you all know this, but just saying, many people still wonder about in that tsunami whether things were radioactive, right? Because there was a meltdown of a nuclear reactor. But remember the timing, right? So the earthquake happened, and hours after that, this amazing tsunami came through and just devastated those coastal communities. And that same tsunami that swept away just thousands of people and their houses and everything is also what caused the eventual meltdown of the reactor. But that reactor meltdown was many days, in fact, more than a week later after the tsunami. So the radioactive activity was mostly contained. We can actually detect traces of it in the ocean, but absolute traces. So when you worry about that amount of radioactivity in the ocean because of that nuclear reactor meltdown, it's actually less than in a bottle of Perrier, because Perrier has radon in it, that same gas that might actually occur in your basement. So when we talk about detection and what we can see, we also have to compare and contrast, like how much, right? Because science can detect tiny little amounts of things. So yes, we can detect the radioactivity, but no, it's not a problem. Okay, so let's see. Locating birds, what about collecting GPS data using apps such as for the iPhone? Yes, they are incredibly accurate, and that's just amazing. We don't actually need that level of accuracy of where the carcass was. Just knowing which beach it's on is completely fine. However, and this is a really interesting thing, we do really want to know what zone of the beach it's on. Is it down in the surf zone, that wetted, washed, wave washed part of the beach? Is it up in the rack, right? Those lines of seaweed and seagrasses and other flotsam and jetsam that have been laid down by sequential high tides. Is it up above that in the bare part of the beach, or the place where people and animals walk all the time, or is that up in the wood, in the large logs that are way in the back beach? And why? Why do we care about where a carcass is? So turns out that scavengers and raptors, scavengers will take carcasses up to the back beach. Raptors will fly, they'll capture birds on the wing and they'll fly to the back beach and they'll sit on a log. So if you find green-winged teal wings, by the way, you'll know that they were daintily dropped there, probably by a peregrine falcon that had a nice meal and left you as a coaster a present, or perhaps bufflehead wings. So a whole carcass, not just wings, but a whole intact carcass that's down in the surf zone, what's that mean? That means that that's a carcass that's literally washed in on the very tide that is coming in or going out while you're surveying. That's a very, very, very recent carcass. That means there's a mortality event happening right then while you're on the beach. So where a carcass is on the beach and whether it's intact or partial can tell you a lot about what's going on. And we use that information over all of the COASST data. So information on the carcass and the body parts are collected by coasters, and we put that all together. So for instance, sorry, I'm running on at the dead bird mouth, but I just got to tell you this. So we had a mass mortality event on the Pribilof Islands, that's up in the Bering Sea, St. Paul and St. George. That's a birder's paradise, by the way, because strays get blown there all the time. So if you have a lot of money to spend, you can go out to St. Paul. So we have coast beaches on both of those islands, and on St. Paul, which is the larger island to the north, there was a mass mortality event of tufted puffins. And we were very, very concerned about that for a lot of reasons that I won't go into. But one thing that we noticed about that mass mortality event is that 75% of the carcasses were completely intact, not a scratch on them, right? Now, St. Paul has Arctic foxes on it. And Arctic foxes at the turn of the season towards the fall will start to patrol the beaches. And they patrol the beaches for dead birds. And so they feast off dead birds all fall and until ice up in the winter. And yet 75% of the carcasses were intact, whereas normally less than 10% of the carcasses on St. Paul are intact. So we knew that there were so many carcasses coming to shore that the entire island's population of Arctic foxes were literally like at a continuous Thanksgiving dinner. They had so much to eat, they couldn't keep up with the food source. And that piece of information and the rate at which foxes normally get carcasses allowed us to model how many carcasses were coming ashore. Super, super cool way of using carrion ecology to understand the mortality event.
I know a bunch of paleontologists who would be interested in that, who are involved in the Society of Avian Paleontology. And there's one that we should actually get for this group. He actually lives down in Gig Harbor. His name's Jim Geddert, and he's just an amateur paleontologist like me, but he's had more finds and more species named after him. One of his finds is a Pletopterid that stood about 7 feet tall here, and over in Japan they stood about 9 to 11 feet tall.
That is a bird I could miss running into on a dark and stormy night.
Yeah.
Yeah, Casey, we have worked with zooarchaeologists in COASST. So there's a lot of interest in ancient peoples, not only along the outer coast of the lower 48, but definitely up in Alaska and out the Aleutians, and how those people made a living and the types of animals that they hunted and whether they hunted or collected. And so we have actually worked with zooarchaeologists who study middens in both Washington and Oregon, and they use the COASST data as a baseline data set for what may have been washing in thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And not just the species distribution, because that is there are some really interesting differences there, but we've been able to test out some theories in zooarchaeology based on the intactness or partial carcassness. And so that's been fabulous. I never in a bazillion years would have said, oh yeah, I'm starting this dead bird beach program to test out theories of zooarchaeology, right? But it turned out that we could do that. So that was super fun.
Right.
Well,
So
thanks
like
for...
Question from Laura, if you saw that one there, about using digital recording of data on beaches, having an app on your phone or something.
Yeah, Laura, that's a really good question. We actually got a grant from the National Science Foundation quite a few years ago when we started our marine debris program. And one of the parts of that grant was to see whether we could put some apps together. And we did a lot of testing. And it turns out that, so the average age of coasters is 54. And people who are 54 are starting to have eyesight problems, right? And it doesn't get better. Y'all know that, right? Gets worse. So seeing little screens is really hard. So then we thought, well, we'll just use like tablets. We'll use bigger screens. Seeing big screens on a beach when it's sunny is hard because of the glare. So you don't want it to be a sunny day. But when it's not sunny, it's often rainy. And you don't want to have a tablet out in the rain. So it can't be sunny and it can't be rainy. And if it's cloudy, not rainy, not sunny, the wind can't be blowing. Because when you have a tablet or a phone and fine sand is blowing across it, or you drop it in the sand, or you drop it in the ocean, not so good. So we stand by write in the rain paper, a clipboard, and a pencil, because you can drop that whole thing in the ocean and then you can pick it up and keep writing. So I actually go to computer science conferences, and I'm asked to speak at computer sciences conference all the time, right? Because they really want to look at all the data and think about all the data. And everybody always asks me, we can make an app for that. And I think, why? Why do we need to put everything on a small screen? Why can't we just have the tactile beauty of a book that you can drop in the water and pick up and dust off? So I think that there's probably some app stuff that we are going to do that's about location, but about the identity kinds of things, I think we're gonna stick with paper. So Ken, what species of puffins do you think it was? What was that puffin species that I showed? I gave you a big hint. Not a Pacific species. I'll give you another hint. Starts with A. Atlantic. That was it. Yes, absolutely.
Vic
Yes.
has a question.
Vic.
Yes. Yeah, Julia, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation.
Sure.
Really appreciate you taking time to share with us this evening. And I must say your energy and enthusiasm that you bring forth in your talk is just wonderful, delightful.
Oh, good.
So thank you, appreciate that.
Sure.
I have a question though. And that, do I understand that your group does some monitoring for European green crab? Is that?
We don't. There's a program that's run by Washington Sea Grant, and that program is called Crab Team. So you can go to the Washington Sea Grant site if you just type that into Google, or honestly, if you type Crab Team with quotation marks into Google, you'll find them. So they do quite a lot of work in Salish Sea, out a little bit out the strait. They work with the Marine Resources Committees, the MRCs of Northwest Straits. So you can also go to the Northwest Straits Commission or the Northwest Straits Initiative. That's that larger intersection between Commission, Foundation, MRCs, and get more info there. Fabulous program, really good.
Thank you.
Sure.
So what's your coverage like? Yeah, obviously you have, not every beach is public, and do you have people that are, private citizens that go outside their house if they live on the water and a part of coast, or are you just looking at those beaches that are public?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. And, it's a really interesting thing in a place like Washington State and along the West Coast, where there is a lot of public dominion and domain over the coastline, right? So getting to a beach might be hard because it goes through private land, but technically being on the beach is a public resource. We don't fight private landowners, but we often work with them. So we will often gain admission to beaches where you have to walk through private land and develop an MOU with a landowner. So as long as coasters behave, quite a lot of landowners are actually quite interested in what's coming into their beach. So we do that, but yes, mostly coast is on very publicly accessible beaches. And some folks can just walk outside. You know, if you live in Ocean Shores, Westport, somewhere on the Long Beach Peninsula, Tahola, you can walk out and do a coast survey. Some folks have a little bit of a walk or a hike or a drive. Some folks drive for hours, park in a parking lot, hike into their beach because it's in a national park, camp overnight, do their surveys. And some folks in Alaska drive to the airport, get in their planes, float planes, fly out to their beaches, do the surveys, and come back. So I have nothing but good things to say about the tenacity of coasters to get to their beach and get data. It is fantastic. I mean, I would not, I mean, obviously I wouldn't have been able to tell you any of the science stories that I've told you tonight, but not only would COASST not be a program, but we would really have no idea how seriously marine birds are affected by the changes that we're seeing in the oceans. And so the fact that there are so many hundreds of people right now, today, but thousands of people over the years is just, it's an amazing testament to how much people want to know about what's going on in places that are important to them. And you know, Audubon is all about that.
Thank you.
I had just a few more questions, if that's okay. First
Sure.
of all, I wanted to just applaud you on a magnificent citizen science program. I've worked with, we have a Burke Museum-based Northwest Paleo Association, which is a much smaller in scope. Of course, paleontology is hard in Washington State because we just don't have that many fossil exposures that are easy for the public to use, and less so. Two things that we run into, especially when I'm working with the California Academy of Sciences and the Burke, is in terms of the access. The two things that we get asked by property owners is, A, what happens if you hurt yourself? Are you covered by any kind of insurance? And B, what happens if you find an endangered species?
Yes. So we have tackled both of those things with respect to the potential for injury. We very much push a safety protocol because we want to reduce things a priori, but we know that accidents will happen.
Yeah.
So because COASST is run out of the University of Washington, people who sign up for COASST have the ability to sign up as an official volunteer of the University of Washington. So should they not have insurance, they will be picked up by workman's comp.
Yeah, and they're covered by an umbrella.
Yep. So we've taken care of that. In terms of endangered species, you know, we definitely record all of the birds on every beach, but we tend not to publish where certain birds, threatened or endangered birds, are. Yeah, and for those very reasons. COASST is, at the end of the day, a science organization. We are not a policing organization.
Right. Yeah, Rich Moy and we usually use the Sergeant Schultz defense and say, oh, we know nothing. We're just here to collect fossils. But there was a case where a group in California went to a landowner and they saw some endangered plant and reported it, and he shut the entire mountain down. So
yeah, well, so we have had a situation that's a little bit like that, in that coasters, because they are looking over so many beaches, have actually extended the known range of nesting for snowy plovers.
Oh, nice.
Because they tend to notice everything on their beach because they're there all the time. And so we have worked certainly with both federal and state agencies to come up with a training protocol that keeps coasters out of the high beach in the months where plovers are nesting. So if plovers are actually nesting in the rack, that's not going to work for them because their nesting cycle lasts longer than a month. So we can coexist, but that's allowed us to continue to say to coasters, hey, we're going to also train you about this listed species. And if you see them live, look for these behaviors, right? You may be recording nesting on a beach where we don't know, where the feds don't know there's nesting, and we can actually extend protections of that bird. And so we, in working with the agencies, which is, 90% of the time it's great, and 10% of the time it's really not so great. But we turn it to the 90% over time. Great question.
And do you go up the rivers, like up the Columbia River and stuff, or is it just strictly coastal?
It's strictly coastal. We nip around into the estuary,
Okay.
into the Columbia River estuary. So we have some beaches on both sides. More on the north side. On the south side of the Columbia, that's pretty developed. Astoria is pretty developed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah,
John,
I
you have a
do.
question?
Well,
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I do the one in Harper Estuary, and at Manchester State Park probably next week. And green crab team, Harper. Luckily, I've never found anything. Jeff Adams, Sea Grant, will be at the Orchid Days at the Harper Estuary on Saturday. So,
Yeah, Jeff is amazing.
oh yeah,
Really a great guy. Incredible. Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody for listening to me and staying and asking questions. Super fun. You're better than the undergraduates at the University of Washington. You're welcome anytime in class. Honestly, that would be great. And if you've got additional questions or thoughts that occur to you, you can email COASST, info@coast.org. So info@coasst.org, or just go to the website and you can get in contact with us, with our science coordinator, our participant coordinator, or with me, and love to answer questions, sell you a field guide, and get you out on the beach.
Well, thanks a lot. And we'll make sure to have a copy of this presentation and those links on our website, the Kitsap Audubon one. So once again, thanks a lot for presentation. Thanks for everyone for joining tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.